room. You are all invited to the Lighthouse
Good afternoon, everyone. I realize people are stretching their legs and talking about our keynote, which was excellent, but we also want to make sure we stay on time and save a few minutes here and get going. So as you can, please take your seat. I see some members are leaving. I hope you'll stay. The annual general meeting is one of the reasons why we do come together, and it's important we have at least quorum to do some association business. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Morgan Kenna, ABCFP President, and welcome to the Association's 72nd Annual General Meeting. At this time, I'd also like to introduce a few people who you're probably familiar with. Vice President Trevor Swan, RPF. Immediate past President Robin Modesto, RPF, PNG. And our Chief Executive Officer, Christine Gelowitz, RPF. I also want to remind you that you have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to submit any advisory resolutions. These are non-binding. They'll be discussed at 11:15 in the departure bay room, and they are used to bring forward new concepts and ideas for both the council and association to consider for the following year. Advisory resolutions are an opportunity for you as registrants to have your ideas delivered directly and quickly to the association's council. So I hope you'll join us at 11:15 tomorrow. Our chair for resolutions this year is Jeff Wattonen from DLA Piper in Vancouver. The back of your delegate program booklet, the small booklet in your bag, contains the forms you can fill out to move forward with an advisory resolution. Please complete those forms and drop them at the registration desk. And with that, now it's my pleasure to call the 72nd Annual General Meeting of the Association of BC Forest Professionals to order. And as I do that, I want to thank Molly and our Nanaimo Host Committee and the ABCFP staff for planning such a great event so far. I'd also like to thank all those who have supported the association by exhibiting in our trade show and in our various functions and sessions we've had thus far. There are several items requiring a vote today, and only registered, retired, and life members in good standing may vote. Would all registered members please raise your hands so we can ensure we have a quorum? And as you do that, I'd like to ask Mike LaRocque, the Association's Director of Practice and Stewardship, to count members present to ensure we have quorum, which is at least 40 members. Nailed it. Thanks, Mike. A reminder, when moving or seconding a motion, please stand and state your name and state it loudly, and if you can, face the room, but also make sure the front can hear so we can capture it for the record. Copies of the minutes from the 71st AGM held in Kamloops in February 2019 are located at the registration desk, and I believe there's extra copies on tables throughout the room. So if you do see a package, grab it, take a look at it. I'd like to ask Trevor Swan to please make the initial motion to start things off. Thank you, Trevor. Does anyone want to second that motion? Thank you, Joe. So any questions or discussion on the motion, which is approving the minutes from last year's AGM? Looks like everyone likes the minutes, so I will call the question. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. Excellent. I'm comfortable that it's passed. Thank you. Now I'd like to call on our CEO, Christine Gelowitz, to share the results of our 2019 year in the annual report, along with senior staff.
Great. So after a long lunch, I admire all of the dedication of everyone in this room to be back in here, and I really appreciate it. The association staff work hard throughout the year with the support of a lot of volunteers from the profession to deliver the work that is our regulatory responsibility and to support our association. So it's my pleasure to be able to reflect on last year and share some of the highlights with you. Today I'm going to do a bit of a top 10, kind of looking backwards, trying to think of 10 things I could tell you as some of the standout things from the last year. And I'll do a couple of deep dives where I'll ask two of our senior staff, Casey McCauley, our registrar, and Mike LaRock, the Director of Practice and Stewardship. I'm going to ask them to join me at the podium a couple times throughout so they can speak to some of the work that they personally deliver. So let's get started. So I'm hoping this video is something that you all saw in the last year. Part of the work that we do at the association, one of our goals is to help people understand who the association is, why we exist, and who forest professionals are. The forest sector is a large sector. It's interconnected, and people can confuse what our role within it is. It's important that we communicated that out. So one of the things that we did in the last year is we produced a short video, obviously an animated one, but then we profiled it through different ad campaigns and other places. And I'm really proud to say that this video had more than 1 million plays. That's a great way to make sure that our message is being heard. So if you haven't saw this video, I really encourage you to find it on our website and watch it. It's short and quick. Number 2, we should scratch that out and say 3 sold-out conferences in a row, which is a really proud accomplishment because it speaks to me about how important it is that forest professionals think professional development is, how much value they place on professional dialogue with their colleagues, and that their employers are supporting them to be here. 3 new ABCFP e-courses. Why would I put this one up there? The reason I put it up there is because I want to talk to you about the importance of continuing professional development. You all, as members of the association, know that we have a responsibility to maintain our competence, and the association staff wants to support you in doing that. So there's quite a few things that you all do on your own that has nothing to do with what we might be delivering at the association, but we also want to support you in achieving your continuing professional development goals. And so that included in the last year putting up 40 free resources on our website, delivering webinars, but in some cases also developing targeted e-courses that were designed specifically to focus on certain aspects of professional obligations. One of those e-courses was the standards of professional practice. And I'm going to not ask you to raise your hand, but I'm just going to put it out there. Think to yourself, can I name the 7 standards of professional practice? And if you're having a hard time, you can take one of our courses. Why you want to know what those 7 standards are is these are the standards that we're held to account. Our complaint and discipline process looks at those standards and holds you to account for them. So if you're not sure what those standards are, we've got a great little e-course. Won't take you very long, half an hour, just a little refresher. Number 4, 4 member-wide survey engagements. One of the things that is tricky to do with over 5,500 members is try to hear from all of you about the things that are important to you, what you want to say. We do a lot of different ways that we attempt to do that. We attend conferences where we think a lot of members may be. That might be going to the silviculture conferences, cruising conferences, different type of forest sector conferences, BC Community Forest Associations, where it's an opportunity to interact with different senior staff. But we also do targeted surveys, and I really strongly believe that I shouldn't ask you for input in a survey if I'm not going to use it. If I don't have a reason or a purpose to ask, don't ask, because you are all busy people. So in the last year, though, we did 4 targeted surveys. One was to help us in responding to government's regulation intentions paper about what's going to come in the Professional Governance Act. Another was regarding the continuing professional development program. We are developing a more structured program, and we wanted to hear from you about where the priorities should be. Another was about thinking about where we're headed. You're going to hear later today that we developed a new strategic plan. The input that people gave into that survey directly was reviewed by council when they met in September to revamp and review what a new strategic plan for the next 4 years looks like. And the last one, which was pretty recent, was about old growth management. So we're really trying to use surveys at the right time and in a focused way where we can utilize your input to help further the products that we're developing and reflect the comments and thoughts that you have. 5 distinguished forest professionals. That is awesome. There's a whole suite of people we're going to recognize tonight at our awards dinner. And we had, I'm trying to look at the notes, but I can't recall off top. Paul, how many different categories did we have? 7 award categories? And 7 categories and a lot of people. And why does that matter? Well, recognition, inspiring to be great, to be good, to deliver high quality work, we all are about that. And if we don't celebrate it and recognize it when we see it, who else is going to? All too often, I have heard the comment, where are all the good stories? Why is no one telling the good stories? The stuff I see is always the negative stories in media. Sometimes we need to tell our own good stories, and that's why having an awards program is an important thing for us, and it's why we spend an evening celebrating the successes of colleagues in the profession. 6 investigation reports completed. Our discipline process is a matter of great consequence to all involved. If you've ever been involved with the process, you know it's taken very seriously, and there's a lot of formality and rigor to it. It's about our public mandate, and throughout the process, it's our goal to seek a fair and just solution while respecting the integrity and dignity of all the people involved. This process has a lot of aspects to it. There's a lot of stuff that occurs throughout it. 3 different committees are involved in delivering it. A lot of our capacity and resources go into our complaint and discipline process. And it's because of that I'd like to ask now Casey to come up and do a bit of a deep dive with you about some of the complaint and discipline outcomes from the last year, and just go a little bit deeper with you. So you just, the green button.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. So as Christine says, the complaints and discipline process, I think everybody at some point in their career, you've either experienced it or a colleague has, or it's something that maybe you fear as this something that could happen, a bad outcome, and it's sort of in the back of your mind. I just wanted to, I've used this diagram before, and it's really just talking about big picture, what's the duty of the profession. The duty is obviously to hold our members accountable. That's what the public expects, that's what the government expects, that's what you expect us to do of your fellow members when something goes wrong. But at the same time, we have to balance fairness with that. And so when you look at any sort of justice system and say, man, this thing is slow, or this thing is arduous, or there's so many elements of it, that's generally the fairness side that's playing into that. procedural fairness and giving people an opportunity to be heard and give their side of the story. This is right out of the annual report. I don't know if the colors show up very well. We've tried to depict this in different ways over the years, but this kind of shows what happens with the complaints tracking through the system. So this year we had 5 new complaints that were, formally prepared and submitted. There were 8 other concerns that, phone calls, people saying this may be something that I want to lodge as a complaint, but ultimately didn't. So the 5 came in. And you can see we've tried to depict what happened to that. And it's a difficult flow chart, I understand, to kind of work through. But a number of them, 3 were not accepted or withdrawn. 1 was recommended by our Complaints Resolution Committee for dismissal. And then 1 proceeded through and is currently in investigation. And you can see that the 13 active cases, that those were ongoing from previous years at various stages. There were 9 investigations that were happening as well this year, and 3 disciplinary actions were taken or against 3 members, and I'll talk a bit about what those outcomes were. So who's making complaints? 51% of our complaints come in from you, from members, against other members. And 27% come from the public. This is a 6-year data set. And then 16% were complaints that were either anonymous or came through, say, Forest Practices Board work, that we have a mechanism in the Foresters Act where we can launch the complaint. And in that case, the president signs it off. And so that's based on, since 2014, 40 formal complaint submissions. Now, there's a lot more than that in concerns, inquiries, that kind of thing that are made. So what about those discipline decisions over that period of time? There's a significant net down from complaints that come in that may be evaluated and dismissed or taken away for other alternate forms, non-disciplinary forms, or post-investigation, the person has provided enough evidence to sort of exonerate themselves from it. But some of those cases do proceed through to eventual disciplinary action. And our discipline committee has signed off on these. We had 1 member who resigned as a result of an investigation. That was a permanent resignation. In other cases, we had orders for training, reprimands, practice restrictions put on that member. There were 4 cases where we levied fines against the members. And 8 of those members were named in consent orders. And I think for our profession, one of the biggest deterrents is having your name put on a disciplinary decision, because we're a relatively small community of people, small towns and all that sort of thing. And that is to some extent some of the reluctance that people have in putting a complaint forward, is because these are their people they work with or colleagues. So there's challenges there for sure in our profession. There's another thing that happens through our act as well. It hasn't happened a lot historically, but it seems to be happening more frequently in recent years, and this is members who were convicted of serious criminal offenses and declare those to the profession. Our bylaw 14 authorizes council to take action on these, so it's like a quasi-disciplinary process. It doesn't happen the same way, but the person is given the same opportunity to present their case to council. In this case, council acts as the disciplinary body and considers and weighs what action they might take. In 2019, we had 2 cases of this. The first member convicted of a serious criminal offense. Council put a lot of consideration to this, and they ultimately put terms and restrictions on the member's registration. A second case came up this year. We're about to publish it. It is coming out. Again, serious criminal convictions, a completely different matter altogether. But I know that any of the council members here weighed very heavily on them this year going through that process. So this is part of our regulatory function. It isn't always fun. It can be really heavy, but it is something that we have to do. So that's that piece. I think I'm turning it back over to Christine. There will be opportunity for questions later.
So back to the top 10, and we're at number 7. And I want to talk about the past year for practice and stewardship. During the past year, we had 7 major practice and stewardship publications. And I'm hoping none of these are a surprise to you, that you've seen all of them. Providing practice guidance to ensure that we have consistent and effective delivery of professional services is a core responsibility. And you can see up on the slide there, maybe, they're kind of small. One of the major ones that we did was regarding watershed assessment and management. This was a product we developed in partnership with our regulatory partners, and no small undertaking to achieve that one. And we also published a practice advisory about professional roles and responsibilities for the life cycle of forest road crossings. There was 5 major public engagements about forest stewardship and management that the association provided written submissions about. So at the start of the year, last January, we submitted our response to the PGA Regulation Intentions paper. And in that response, we exerted several key principles about the granting of practice rights to regulators that'll be under the PGA. Considerations from our perspective for how competence and conflict declarations might be best handled, as well as some early considerations about the regulation of firms. The next one in the year that we developed was a response to the Forest and Range Practices Act changes. We developed a response to the Interior Forest Sector Renewal Public Engagement, Private Managed Forest Land, and most recently, the Old Growth Strategic Management, which you can find a copy of that publication here at the conference and also on our website. This list of 7 publications is far from the work that gets done in the Practice and Stewardship Department. And if you haven't found a copy of the annual report, the things that we're talking about, the statistics Casey mentioned, the earlier things I spoke of, they're all in the annual report. And you're also going to find in the annual report on page 12 some of the other work that is done by the Practice and Stewardship Department. But for now, I'd like to just give you one other opportunity here from practice by calling up Mike LaRocque to talk about one of the services that we also provide, which is around, let's advance the slide, practice advisory services. So we provide the opportunity for members to reach out to the association for advice about ethical and practice issues, and Mike and his team lead that up. I'm going to give the floor to Mike to talk about what happens in that service and a bit of a taste for what that looks like.
Thanks, Christine. As Christine pointed out, the year was pretty action-packed for professional practice and forest stewardship. Some of those highlights are in the annual report, and they just touched the surface. But there was one in particular that we wanted to bring to your attention, and that's the area of personal professional advice. For almost 20 years, the ABCFP has in some form provided a service to forest professionals who wanted independent, confidential advice. It came in many different forms. It may have been a phone call, it may have been an email, a letter, but at first we had a group of senior practitioners that would look over the request, and oftentimes the individual was not identified, it was just the question itself. But it would take 3 to 4 weeks to go through and then provide a response. We learned from our members that they wanted a response faster. If there was an issue that I was dealing with, I wanted somebody to tell now, and that was half of it, was being able to tell them what the problem was, tell us what the problem was. And the second was getting some independent and confidential advice. So it's not something that we marketed broadly. It's not something that even showed up on our business plan for quite a while. It was only Christine that put it there in the last few years. It was something we did and we continue to do as senior staff. This year there were, as Christine mentioned, there was 143 separate requests or last year, I mean. There's reasons why we're addressing this, but first I want to give you some examples of the kinds of things that our forest professionals are asking. Some are reasonably short. For example, it was pointed out to me that registered forest professionals are excluded from the Employment Standards Act. Is this true? How is it applied? And how does this affect my practice? In some cases, these are not necessarily related to the practice of forestry, or they're subsequent to, and so we sometimes have to gather information. But actually, that question is one we've gotten at least over a dozen times. So I identified it. Some are ethical issues. For example, in our town, I just got elected to one of the regional district board positions. One of the key issues is an issue around resource use. The communication within our town and within the board itself is polarized and entrenched. Everyone there knows I'm a forest professional and that I have knowledge of the issue. Am I in conflict as a professional in my role as a regional district director? Am I prevented from doing my role because if I am in conflict? What are the options that are available to me? In other times, the circumstances are complex and they actually incorporate practice. They may be ethical dilemmas, but all tied up in a knot of professional practice. For example, in our area, we have a federal recovery strategy for a species at risk. And the province doesn't recognize this particular recovery strategy as a limitation on other uses. I work for an employer who wants a particular outcome, and they understand their rights relative to that outcome. How do I manage my professional service? What are my professional obligations? And those are really tough questions. Those are the ones we spend time on, we anguish over. We don't try to answer all the detail. That's impossible for us to do. In some cases, we'll actually get legal advice, or the answer is you need to seek legal advice. In other cases, it's about insurance and liability, and we have connections there. Or it might be about forest practice knowledge that lie within the various ministries where there are expertise, or within our educational institutions. We can always address the professional issues, though, as professionals ourselves. So as your staff of the ABCFP, we try to facilitate the conversation and then assist the forest professionals to come to their own conclusions for their specific practice. So one reason why we wanted to highlight this, particularly at this AGM, is that we heard from Paul Craven earlier today, and the Professional Governance Act now includes a section, and it's in the protection of the public interest with respect to professional governance. That's Part 6. And we'll find most of the indicators around directing our service in that section. And under the specific section, Standards of Conduct and Competence, Section 57. This particular section tells the Council of the ABCFP, you must make bylaws establishing a program to assist registrants in dealing with professional and ethical issues. So there it is, now in black and white, something we kind of did off to the side. Now we're being told this is part of your regulated responsibility. So we've done this in the past, we've refined it over the years, and from time to time we've produced an article in the BC Forest Professional, the top 3 questions, and we've given the answer and offered forest practitioners to say, what do you think? You agree? Do you have an issue of your own you want to raise? So it's an area that we wanted to highlight today because, well, to let you know that this service is available. And it's also where we're going to be directing some efforts because it's identified as an area of work for us under the new Professional Governance Act. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mike. Number 8. So it's around this time of year, our fiscal year, as you guys all know, ends on November 30th. And so year-end stats come out in the January-February edition of the magazine. And I've heard from many professionals who say they're always intrigued by that edition, and they flip to the back of the magazine and they look who may have resigned, who is now retired, who is removed. And without a doubt, we always get every year a number of questions. Oh my gosh, is the profession okay? Are we losing members? Where are people going? There's always a natural amount of attrition happening. It just, when you see it all rolled up at year end, it looks a little bit more daunting. And the message I wanted to deliver for you today is that we have a really good news story here. We are in strong shape. We're slightly growing as a membership. Casey is going to get into some more details about the specifics right now, and it's also in the annual report. But up here, I wanted to show you the last 20 years of our membership, going back to 1999, where we sat about just below 4,000. You can see we spiked up at 2009 at just over 5,400, dropped down a little bit, and in 2019, we're up over 5,500. There isn't cause for concern about the state of our membership. We are strong, we are healthy. And the other key message I'd like to leave with you about our membership is this, that there are more registered forest professionals here in BC than the entire rest of Canada combined. We are a strong organization with a lot of forest professionals working in it, and it's something to be proud about. I also think registration is a very large part of what we do as an association. A lot of our capacity is there. We have a board of examiners working there, 6 subcommittees that work under that board of examiners, and a staff team that works in this area. So I'm going to ask Casey now to come and share with you a bit of a deeper dive about our membership, what it looks like, the diversity, the mix, and give you a little bit of a snapshot on the membership. Casey.
Yeah, so she stole my thunder. It's a good news story. It's modest growth, and if we're not conservative, then what are we as forest professionals, hey? I wanted to jump into those numbers. There's a few there you can kind of see the last few years. That's from our annual stats summarized. Okay, and a lot of people will say, what about all these retirements, right? Well, enrollment is outpacing retirement. That's really what you can take away from that. And also, in case you're curious about the percentage of RPFs to RFTs, it's around 70-30 when you roll up FITs, trainees, life members, retired members as well, 68-30 about that. So what are the trends in enrollment? Well, 216 new applications. These were applications that met all the criteria and came in. In 2019, you can see the breakdown between FITs and trainee forest technologists. The big year, though, was last year, and I think this does follow the peak enrollment in the schools as well. We're a receiver of all of the various things that are going on in the job market and in the schools. If there's strong demand in the workforce, then it shows up in our enrollment numbers. And just to go back a few years, you can see how big 2018 was and how 2019 was as well. It'll be interesting to see this year, but from my staff letting me know the numbers are still coming in strong. So I think part of it is we've been having a lot of conversations like this week with amongst council and with members. I think sometimes in your workplace you feel like they let 5 people go or this kind of a thing. But when you look at where the new members are going, it's not necessarily into the traditional forestry jobs. So sometimes it's good to get out of your own space and talk to other people about where the growth is happening in the profession. Registration trends, so of those numbers, these are the numbers of people who actually got registered in that fiscal year. So 94 in this past year completed all of the requirements for registration. And you can see the numbers from the previous years. Age of membership, what's the sort of demographic? It's a total bell curve in our profession. I'll just click through it all here. I don't know if you can see all the numbers, but we've got You know, everything from, I don't think we have any 15-year-old members, but there's the grouping anyway. Prodigies. But over half of our membership is between 40 and 60. You know, there's the middle of the curve. And so I think it's a pretty healthy balance that way. But, you know, anybody who was in the diversity presentation this morning talking about women in the membership, we ran the numbers on this. This is part of our annual report. You can find this all in the reports. There's more copies at the back, you guys. Within the honorary member class, it's just 10% female. When you combine all categories, it's around 21%. But when you look at the enrollment, it's much higher. It's almost double that. And probably any of you who are recently in a forestry school would say, you know, close to half your class was female. So it'll be interesting to say. Again, I'm curious to hear from you guys, from employers, from the schools themselves. What role can the profession have in assisting with the diversification of the profession? You know, I think there's some limitations on that. But anyway, those are the registration numbers, and I'll turn it back over to Christine.
Thank you, Casey. So back to the top 10, number 9, 9 meetings with government about PGA implementation. I had to look back through all the months and take a look at this. And when I say meetings, I'm not talking about half-hour meetings. I'm talking all day long. Paul, where are you? These are your meetings. And it wouldn't have been a top 10 list if I didn't talk about the work that we are doing to transition under the Professional Governance Act. And as you will know if you were at this morning's session or have been following over the last while, the Foresters Act is going to be replaced by the Professional Governance Act. And the image I'd like to leave in your mind right now is picture running a factory full shifts and no downtime. And we're now going to retrofit the factory, but we're not going to take any downtime. That's the process that the association is going through right now to figure out how we're going to move all of our policy and legislation under the Professional Governance Act while we continue to deliver our business under the Foresters Act. The good news is that we're not really adding new things to the plate at this point. We are a strong regulator. We've been fulfilling the roles and duties that we're supposed to do, but it will change how we do some of the things that we do. And we're going to have to tweak some things and move them over. But just realigning the policy work is going to take us quite a bit of effort. Our Foresters Act has 37 sections in it. We got to figure out how that fits in. We have 13 very detailed bylaws that include our code of ethics and our standards of professional practice. Underneath those bylaws, there's 50 policies and procedures directing how that stuff happens. And then there's 24 terms of reference for the committees that are helping deliver all that work. Every one of those things needs to be recalibrated and realigned. And the goal is to realign the majority of the bylaws by next November, and all those detailed policies and terms of reference will come in the year after that. So there's quite a bit of work underway in that area, which is why that made number 9 on the list. I want to cap off with number 10, just talking about the state of the finances. And it's also a really strong message here that we've had a lot of financial stability over the last decade. And I took a look back at, and I'm sure many of you will remember the early 2000s, there were some pretty big deficit years. I think it was 2008, the deficit was about $166,000. 2009, I believe it was in the $60,000 to $80,000 range. And but the last 10 years, we've had 2 pretty small deficits and 8 small surpluses, delivering our budget every year within 1% on average of what we expected to do. Things are pretty stable and we're in good shape. You're going to hear from Lance a little bit later. He'll deliver the finance report, which will give you more information about the state of our reserve fund and some of the other details from the last 2019 year. But I'll leave that for Lance. So to close, what's next? What's going to happen in 2020? There's a new strategic plan, which you'll have an opportunity to talk with council about, what drove the changes that are in here, what is looking different, and we'll take the next year and deliver on it, and you'll hear more from details next year at the AGM about what happened here. But for now, I'm going to give the floor back to our president, and or my apologies, sorry I didn't bring up my speaking guide. I'm going to actually give the floor back to Casey now to do a piece about our condolences.
So we just want to take a moment to recognize our members who have passed this past year. And I'm just going to list their names for you. Jeffrey David Alexander, RPF. Paul James Braunberger, RFT. William Thomas Clark, RPF. Norman S. Denmark, RPF, retired. Peter L. Fuglem, RPF, retired. Terrence W. Irwin, RPF, retired. Trevor G. Jeans, RPF, retired. Kevin A. Johnston, RPF. Roger M. Marshall, RPF, retired. Henry A. Olson, RPF, retired. Colleen Joanne Pedrati, RPF. John H. Russell, PhD, RPF. Conrad F. Smith, RPF, retired. Donald W. Smith, RPF, retired. John Sauser, RPF, retired. Lou K. Tromp, RPF. Joseph Nicholas Vanderswan, RPF. And Ian W. Wood, RPF, retired. If you could just observe a minute of silence with me. Thank you. See?
Thank you, Casey. So that concludes the business report. I'm going to ask President Kenna to come up and put a motion on the floor regarding the business report. And when she opens it for discussion, staff and I are happy to take questions on anything that we just presented.
Thanks, Christine, Mike, and Casey. And as Christine noted, I'm now looking for a motion for someone that looks something like the following, that the 2019 annual business report be approved as presented. So I need you to stand and tell me your name.
Richard Laverty.
Okay, Richard, thank you. And it looks like there's a natural seconder, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. So now it's time for any questions or discussion on the business report that you've just had a chance to enjoy. Bob.
Just a question. Do you have some rough idea of what's actually costing the association to implement the Professional Governance Act?
Christine or Lance may have a better idea. I'd say it's multifaceted, right? There's lots of legal, but.
So at this point, it certainly cost increased legal fees. Last year it was not as significant as what we're expecting this year or what we forecasted. It's a little too early to judge on the legal fees. In terms of staff capacity, what we're doing is just reprioritizing and adjusting things, so we're not anticipating increased costs. So at this juncture, I'd say direct costs, financial costs, are related to legal, and in this current year, the budget for legal was about $80,000, I believe.
Yeah. So Lance just said that he will share some more details on that when he gives the financial report, so thanks ahead to Lance. Any other questions or discussion on the report? Okay. Well, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the report as presented? Hands high. Okay. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion's carried. And next up is Lance to deliver the 2019 business report. Lance is our ABCFP Director of Finance and Administration.
Thank you, Morgan. 2019 was another good year financially for the association. Staffing vacancies, a surplus from last year's conference, and continued high level of new enrollments were major contributing factors. So this slide shows how our expenses are distributed to 7 different business functions of the association. And in partial response to Bob's question, the area of governance increased 5% over that of 2018, primarily due to Professional Governance Act implementation expenses. Off the top of my head, we have been tracking those expenses, and off the top of my head, I seem to recall it's in the $90,000 range in 2019. Our audited financial statements that are on the website will have that number, that exact number. Other business areas only changed by 1 or 2%, mainly decreased 1 or 2%. The data in this slide is identical to the data in Christine's last slide, the last 10 years of operating results. It's just shown in bar chart format. Oh, I'm sorry. So with those good results, the association's operating fund is very healthy. The reserve fund has also had a good year and is in extremely good shape. Its investments earned an overall 6% rate of return in 2019. And here's our fiscal 2020 operating budget with 2019 actuals for comparison. It's the first time in 10 years that we've tabled a deficit budget, but as you can see from the previous slides, the association has ample resources to fund a small deficit. That concludes my report. Please remember, as I mentioned, the audited statements are posted on the website and you can obtain more details there. And I'm going to turn it back to Morgan and there will be an opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Lance. Could I please have a motion to adopt the finance report and the audited financial statements for the 2019 fiscal year ending November 30th, 2019 as presented? Thank you.
I'll second that, Jason Hutchinson.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Any questions or discussion about the financial report that Lance has delivered? Yes.
I was just wondering, Lance, what is our reserve fund target? Has that changed over the years?
There is a reserve fund policy, and it sets one of the targets at being 1/2 of annual budgeted expenses. And when it reaches or exceeds that level, a portion of the reserve fund's revenue goes back to the operating fund, and we're now at that level. We have been, this is our second year that we've achieved that level.
Quiet crowd. Okay. Well, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the 2019 financial report? Excellent. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks, Lance. Next is the appointment of auditors. Our auditors for the last several years have been the D&H Group. Our Finance Committee recommends that they be reappointed. Could I please have a motion to appoint D&H Group as our auditors for the 2020 fiscal year? Thanks, Candace. Naturally, we need a seconder. Okay, Sterling, thank you. Any questions or discussion on the purpose of financial auditors of the D&H Group or this motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Terrific. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. I will now call on Tony Wong, MRM, MBA, RPF, to present the returning officer's report for the recent council election.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure of presenting the results of the recent election for the 73rd ABCFP Council. The ballot count was held jointly by web conference and with people in the ABCFP office on Wednesday, January 15th, 2020. People assisting the returning officer with the ballot counting included member scrutineers Michael Armstrong, RPF CPA CA, and Dave Patterson, RPF. And we had assistance from staff, Deputy Director Chi Sehalvo, RD NP, Manager of Registration Conrad Mullally, and Senior Communications Digital Specialist Jennifer Lee. I confirm that the ballots were counted in accordance with the ballot counting procedures established by the association. There were a total of 32 mail-in paper ballots, and we checked those mail-in ballots against criteria, and none were disqualified for any reason. Online, there was a total of 641 electronic ballots cast, and the total number of ballots we received and counted was 673. So I therefore declare the following members elected to the 73rd Council of the Association of British Columbia Forest Professionals. So for President, Trevor Swan, LLB, RPF, for a 2-year term. For Vice President, Trevor Joyce, RPF, for a 3-year term. For RPF Councillor, Jason Fisher, RPF, for a 3-year term. And for RFT Councillor, Kelly Kitch Cameron, RFT, for a 3-year term. And following association procedures, the ballots will be held at the ABCFP offices for at least 30 days from today. And that's the report from the Ballot Counting Committee. Any questions? No? So congratulations, and thanks to the candidates who ran as well. Okay.
Thanks, Tony, and congratulations, everyone. And as we look forward now, like 11 months, we need to ensure that we have folks like Tony to make sure we can have another successful election. So our bylaws require that we appoint a returning officer and scrutineers at the AGM. So could I please have a motion to appoint Tony Wong, MRM, MBA, RPF, as returning officer, and Michael Armstrong, RPF, CPA, CA, and Dave Patterson, RPF, as the scrutineers for the coming year? Thank you, Candace. Could I have a seconder? Ian, thank you. Any discussion or questions? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of our scrutineer and returning officers? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, carried. Thank you. And that concludes our business portion of the annual general meeting. Now we're going to give you the opportunity to engage with members of council and senior staff to ask questions about the annual report or the work of council and anything that you may be curious about. In an interactive session, we're calling this Conversations with Council, and it replaces a session we had last year called Coffee with Council. Almost the same design, we just didn't have coffee. And previously it was called Council Hot Seat. And I'll invite Christine up just to talk a bit more about it as we get set up. All right, well then I'm going to ask my friend Troy Lee to join me on stage, who will moderate this session. So a little bit about this session. Conversations with Council are set up to be a learning organization tool. So we've asked Troy, as our manager of member competence and engagement, to lead facilitation tables on 5 different topics. I think Troy will discuss the exercise, but I can introduce the 5 topics. And they should show up on the screen here at any moment. So the first one is about serving on ABCFP council and committees. Why serve on an ABCFP committee? And there you'll engage with Els Armstrong and Carrie Simmons. The second is on changes to scope of practice of professional forestry in the PGA. Do you think the definition of the scope of professional forestry practice needs to be modified? How and why? Here, your leads will be Jamie Jeffries, Robin Modesto, and Bowen Sly, supported by Mike LaRock. Third is all about engaging with forest professionals from the association's perspective. So what do forest professionals expect from the ABCFP in their communications? This topic will be led by myself and Garnet, and will be supported by Dean and Chi. The fourth table will be on the future of the ABCFP. How should forest stewardship fit into the ABCFP's regulatory mandate in the future? This table will be led by Trevor Swan and Marina Rayner, and will be supported by Christine Gelowitz. And the fifth and final table is all about professional development. So it's called Professional Development in the Forest Professional. Should professional development tracking and mandatory requirements be based, what should professional development tracking and mandatory requirements be based on? Amount, time, topic? So there you'll find Ken Day, Wendy Royal, leading from the council's perspective and supported by Casey McCauley and Paul Nuttall. Any questions about conversations with council and what we're about to do? Okay, if you look around the room, just spin around, you'll see some placards. And so that's the general areas where we'll congregate in those 5 topics. Troy, anything that I missed?
You started early.
Huh? Eager.
Okay, awesome. All right, everyone pick their station.